US President Donald Trump's order to immediately resume the testing of nuclear weapons, that directive largely targeting nuclear powers China and Russia. It's still unclear, of course, if Mr. Trump was actually referring to a nuclear weapons test or a test of a nuclear-capable weapons system. None of the world's three major military powers, the US, China and Russia, has conducted such a nuclear weapons test since the 1990s. Mr. Trump's demand came just minutes ahead of his meeting with Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, which signaled a warming of relations between the two superpowers. For more analysis into the leaders' meeting, we're joined by Wu Xinbo. He's director of the Center for American Studies at Fudan University, and he joins us live from Shanghai. Professor Wu, in fact, it was minutes before the meeting formally started. We had a post from Mr. Trump suggesting that need to bring the US on equal footing with other nuclear powers, which does suggest whatever gains we might have had on trade, the challenge of Beijing and Washington managing the multifaceted ties, that challenge is very large.
Well, I think Trump always concerns that in comparison with China or Russia, the US might be put in disadvantaged position. So before his meeting with President Xi, he announced the decision to resume nuclear test. But in my opinion, that has little impact on China because simply the U.S. cannot conduct nuclear blackmail against China. And most importantly, by doing that, I think the U.S. shows that it is a major violator of international consensus on no more nuclear test. So also, if the U.S. is going to use that leverage to press China to join Russia-U.S. talks on nuclear weapons, I also believe it will not work out its way. So anyway, I don't think this announcement is a big deal for China, and it will enhance the U.S. goal in any way.
All right, Professor Wu, if, as you say, President Trump is mercurial and he can walk back anything, including any agreement on nuclear testing, would you say any agreement reached on trade today, do those count as big deals?
Well, I think we made some important progress on trade and economic front. For example, the U.S. side agreed to remove 10% tariff related to fentanyl issue on Chinese products. Also, it suspended its new rule, which may put thousands of Chinese firms on their entity list. And also, it agreed to suspend collecting tariffs and fees against China-related ships as well as port facilities. Now, for China, it also agreed, for example, to take stricter measures against fentanyl-related chemicals. And we agreed to suspend the new rule regarding rare earth export control. And finally, we agreed to start to purchase the U.S. soybeans. All these issues are very much top on Trump's agenda. So I think this, if you look the progresses made in trade and economic areas, that is pretty much a win-win situation, even though some people may say, oh, China may win more, the U.S. may win less. But I mean, that is a win-win situation. And also we should put this in a broader context. That is just a staged outcome, and more is going to happen in the next several months.
In a way, why would you expect more to happen? Why would you expect that more to be progress rather than lack of progress?
Well, first and foremost, we have still many other issues on bilateral agenda. the trade and economic issues that have to be resolved, like the tariff issue, like the technology control, like the entity list. So the two sides have agreed to continue to solve these issues through trade negotiation. I think that we will have at least one more round of trade talks at the end of this year. And then toward next April, when President Trump is going to visit China, if this visit is to happen, and if he wants to make his visit successful, there have to be progress to be made in better relations, especially on trade and economic front. So anyway, this is a work in progress.
In order to keep that work staying on progress, you have, in fact, in the lead up to these talks, your considered opinion, and this was in articles and interviews that you gave, you were saying that you did not want to see any more wrangling on specific trade tariffs. You wanted to see a larger overarching framework that would define this relationship so that it would not stumble, would not go backward on specific individual issues. On that, have you been disappointed?
I'm not that disappointed at the outcome of this particular meeting. I would view it as a positive step in the right direction. So building on the current progress, we can have more talks and dialogues and try to make more progress down the road. So in the next 1 year or two, maybe there will be much broader consensus on better relations, not only about trade and economic relations, but also about diplomatic and security relations. So this is going to be a phased approach, step by step. Every time you achieve some progress and then build the momentum for the next stage. So we should have this kind of larger goal in mind while we, strive for progress at each stage.
All right, thanks. Building on small gains, Professor Wu Xinbo, Director of the Center for American Studies at Fudan University. Getting back to Mr. Trump's comments on resuming nuclear tests. Moscow has responded to that, looking to cool tensions with Washington. And Dasha Chernyshova joins us now reporting for CNA from Moscow. Dasha, we have heard some response from Moscow to that decision from President Trump. Could you expand on Moscow's response?
Indeed, the Kremlin has been very cautious on Thursday, given its reaction to those comments by Mr. Trump, suggesting that Moscow has committed itself to the moratorium on the no tests of nuclear weapons, and Moscow was hoping the U.S. would do the same. It also says that the tests, the recent ones that Moscow conducted of its Burevestnik and Poseidon weapons, some of the recent technologies, they were no nuclear tests, and this information has to be given to the American president. So Moscow continues to insist that those tests of these latest weapons have actually been in line with Moscow's objective to ensure its own national security, and those tests should be in no way seen as those of nuclear weapons, even though we understand those types of weapons are capable of a lot of destruction and are sending a very strong message to the Western world. Many analysts here have been suggesting that the establishment in the Western countries should take these tests very seriously. So the Kremlin at this stage is insisting that it has not been provided with any sort of information by the American side before those comments were made by the American president. And in Moscow, indeed, the hope is that there is common sense among the politicians.
So, Dasha, Moscow essentially categorically refuting any charge that it has conducted any kind of nuclear test since 1990. Ironically, could President Trump's announcement today trigger Russia or send Russia into actually starting or returning to its nuclear testing?
Well, as we see the rhetoric from the Kremlin, Moscow does not want to see any sort of a new arms race, suggesting that even though there were the tests of Russia's recent weapons, even though Trump said there was a nuclear submarine close to the Russian borders, Moscow is not seeing any new spiral of the new arms race. And that is a very important message that you have to read from the Kremlin's words. At this stage, we understand Moscow still hopes that the dialogue is actually something that will prevail when it comes to the relationship between Moscow and Washington, with the Kremlin saying that they are not observing that new spiral and stressing that the American administration should also be well aware that there are arrangements between the two countries should be discussed in more detail. So the hope in Moscow is that there will be more arrangements on the conduct of those nuclear tests, as well as on this moratorium, and as well as the START treaty, something that has to be discussed in terms of its prolongation. So the hope in Moscow is that through dialogue between the two capitals, the sides will be able to avoid any sort of new arms race or escalation.
Thanks, Dasha Chernyshev, reporting for CNA from Moscow.